From 17 once again. This is my Dark Souls 2 DLC walkthrough. This is episode 1, The Crown of the Sunken King. So, upon purchasing the DLC, you will be furbished with the Dragon Talon. It's an item that you now need to access the content herein. To access it, go to the Black Gulch, go to the Primal Bonfire just after where you beat the Rotten, and you'll notice that there's a new chamber there. They've hollowed out a wall. It's all glowing and bright. It's very hard to miss. Once you go up to it, you'll notice there's an altar very much like the one in the Shrine of Winter, and it's going to take you to Shulva, which is the area that we're in right now. The build that I'm using at this moment is pretty much just a dex build that I have. It's the character that I got the... is it No Death or No Bonfire? I'm not too sure which playthrough I did. He has a ring that makes one of his weapons invisible, but you won't be seeing that ring because it's kind of pointless. The stats on him, nothing too astounding. He has, I think, 45 dex. He's using a Chaos Blade. The Chaos Blade has been recently touched in the patches, so I was interested to see how that would reflect on gameplay. I also have some attunement to use Scraps of Life, but it's at the base requirements, which is very low. I think it's something like 5 intelligence and 12 faith, maybe? And you may be wondering, what's the point, you know, if I don't have any scaling from those stats on that spell? Well, I was very curious to see if Scraps of Life would pancake the bosses, the gank squad we're going to be fighting later on in this DLC. Because if you check the patch notes, you'll see that Firestorm spells and the spells of that caliber all took a pretty big hit. So I wanted to see, not necessarily the damage, just the consistency that I could flatten those bosses, because my logic was, if I could lure the Havel and the Alva Knight away from the Archer, I could flatten them, they'd have the subsequent recovery time, and then I could kill the Archer in that time. I won't spoil, however, if that worked, or if it was a good strategy to do until we get there. But this is Shulva, and this is my favourite area of the DLC. I think it's the most interesting, because the level design here is really different to a lot of Dark Souls 2's normal level structure, and I think it definitely harks back to the older Souls games. There's a lot of verticality, there are switches that can be used as traps, there are raising platforms. It has a very interlinked feeling of caverns, valleys and peaks and things, and it's very labyrinthine in its design, but at the same time, once you've ran around a few times, you know where you're going. And it can be tackled in a variety of different ways, which is one of the things that makes it stand out as the best area in this DLC. I like the traps. The enemies that you'll be facing here are a mixture of the standard Sanctum Knights, who are this humanoid, zombified, crazy mace-wielding fellas. Some of them have bows and what looks like a straight sword. Some of them have lances. But the unifying thing about this enemy type is they all have more poise than you think they will have. So they will be able to take a lot more hits than you're used to. They have a very high amount of HP, and they do a lot of damage. They're kind of the, you know, the DIY do-everything enemy, because they can deal good damage, they can take good damage, and they can stun you. And they do a good job of defending their homeland, which can be a little frustrated considering how many of them there are in some areas. You just have to know where is safe, where is not safe, and just be aware that the durability changes that's happened in patches are affecting everything, and this DLC seems to be even more so. So whatever weapon you bring in, if it's known for being quite fragile, it's going to break a lot, and you're going to have to either repair it or you're going to have weapons to swap out with. The cool thing about this build is I take an arrow to the face. Not the face, sorry, to the neckline or the hood. As I was falling too, that just goes to show the accuracy of some of the archers. It's crazy. But regardless of what you're using, it's tough on your durability. So I have a bunch of different katanas on this build that I can swap to. I want to use the Chaos Blade though, because I thought it might add an excitement factor to some areas of the DLC, especially the bosses. I wanted to know if I could race the bosses, and I found out quite quickly that wasn't going to be a thing, because the bosses have a lot of life, and some of them, if I take no damage in the entire fight and I hit the boss, enough times to kill myself, the boss will still live, and I will die, which is a problem. And I stacked some damage with the rings that I had and with buffs and things, and I still wasn't able to kill some of them because the HP values were so high. So on a lot of the boss fights you're going to see me swapping out to different weapons. I also wanted to use the Drakeblood sword, which looks so cool. It's one of my favourite items from the DLC. The problem with it is it does a large amount of split damage, so the stats on it look pretty impressive until you realise that it's been broken off into 3 different areas. And if you're unaware of how the scaling and how defences work on this game, if you have one weapon specialising in one thing, when you come up against someone who defends against that, you're at a disadvantage. But if you come up against somebody who doesn't, you're at the best advantage you can be of. And that guy snuck up on me then. I heard him on the microphone, but I wasn't playing with sound at the time. Another thing you want to be careful of, nothing in this game makes any sound, except for when they swing. And it can make you jump quite a lot if you're not paying attention. And I'm often guilty of not paying attention. This particular trap here is kind of sneaky. There are a ton of enemies that stand up, there are a ton of archers, but there is things you can do to make it easier. And one of them is to shoot the switches to raise the platforms to block the archers. Unfortunately, some of the archers will adjust. They'll move, and then they'll just start shooting at you from a distance. And it's one of those traps where you're wasting time fighting the guys up close, and the archers are just chipping away at your life. So you'll notice I spotted the switch just then. I'll lure the bow shots, and then I'll hit, so I can get some cover from them. And unfortunately, they're better than me and faster than me in almost everything I do. So I take some hits, but it's all good because we've got plenty of Estus. And we can push onwards to this guy, put some pressure on him, and get the backstab. Backstabbing is the easiest way to kill this enemy type because they're incredibly susceptible to it. Parrying works well as well, should you choose to do that. Here there's 2 archers and a lance guy stands up, so lure the lance guy, pull him back over here and deal with him. Just be aware that the archers will kind of shimmy their way around to try and hit you. Sneaky buggers they are. But wow. Oh, that's okay. I thought that was the lance that hit me then. That was the archer. That made sense. If it had been him with the lance, it would not have made as much sense. But split damage can really hurt you if you're up against something that has high defences for whatever your splits are. And the problem you're going to find with that Drakeblood sword is some people are just... You know, some bosses, some enemies are not going to feel the full brunt of it, and the stats are going to feel like a lie. And if you've ever used the... I forget the name of it, but there's a certain staff that's kind of like coiled wood, which, when you look on your stats, it gives you over 1,000 attack range on your magic. Yet when you use it, it doesn't seem all that impressive. And the reason for it is it's split on almost every single element. And it's one of these things where they're almost a beginner trap, these weapons, where the base attack rating looks really high, but then when you use it, it isn't, because whatever you're up against is strong against lightning, and it has a lightning modifier, and things like that. So it's kind of knowing your enemy that makes those weapons work the best. And you will see me fight, I believe I fight Ilana with the Drakeblood sword, because I was farming some petrified dragonbone before I did this walkthrough so that I could upgrade it immediately. I was also going to use a couple of the other weapons, but nah, they're just... I'm not the biggest fan of them. Like, the maces are great, but they poison you. The yaw spear is interesting, but it breaks really quickly. And then the puzzling sword is just a straight sword, and I get bored of the straight swords really quickly. It has some fantastic R2s, but they can be parried, which is a little interesting choice from FromSoft. And the weapons in the DLC overall are very disappointing for me, because I was hoping that they would come with completely new movesets, and a couple of them have combined movesets. One of them has completely new moves, but those new moves just kind of look like the curved sword special moves, just with this Ivy-esque Soul Calibur stretchy whip sword thing. But here is the most interesting enemy of the DLC. This is just a Sanctum dual-wielding warrior. He's very reminiscent of the Black Skeletons from Shrine of Storms. But how he works is you can hurt him with magic damage, or any magic on weapons as when he's in spectral form, but anything else does not deal damage to him. You have to find his body, you have to desecrate his corpse, and then he will take form, and then you can proceed to beat him, however should you choose to. You can backstab this enemy, you can parry this enemy. The only thing to bear in mind is if you're rocking low poise and he does his 4-hit combo, it can be a one-shot, in my experience of it. Because the first 2 hits are very difficult to get away from, the 3rd hit will stun you, and then the 4th hit has a big wind-up while you're stunned and finishes you off. So you just want to be quite careful. Luckily enough, incredibly susceptible to being backstabbed. You know, not very smart in their endeavours, and they don't track quite as hard as certain enemies in this game do. So I think it's fair how they work. You know, they have this massive capacity for damage, they have a lot more range than you ever think they would, but they have a very large weakness, which is their back. And it's kind of funny, because if you think about it, the Shulva level design, very old school Souls-esque in some of the ways it works. The enemy design on these particular ones, incredibly susceptible to backstabs, don't track as well as a lot of things in Dark Souls 2. It seems very old school Souls-esque, and it's kind of like contradictory in this game because it works so different to those old games. But when you push through here, there's going to be 3 Sanctum Knights. 2 of them are coated in poison and will ambiently poison you. I don't really understand it. I know there's the lore aspect of the dragon that got attacked by Yor, released a cloud of poison, which essentially just assailed the entire city. But it doesn't make sense why these people have them and the other ones don't. It just seems to be this thing where these guys who unfortunately are really smelly, don't use their deodorant or what have you, and that's okay. But luckily enough, that is the only real caveat they have. Do not step on the trap. Very dangerous. And then here's this guy. So, this is a double pull, this. When you trigger this guy, you trigger the guy across there, and you need to be aware that this enemy really hurts. See that? They really hurt, and the mace gives them a lot of range. So you have to play a lot smarter than I'm playing, but that's the luxury of a walkthrough. You know, I can be a lot more cavalier with these situations because I know what's coming. If you want to see a more tentative approach, I do have a blind playthrough that is running at this moment in time, where I share my first impressions of the game, and it's an interesting series. I had a lot of fun with it. But when you come over here, there's this sneaky button on the roof. There's a lot of this throughout the DLC. There's buttons that open doors that get rid of traps. And for some reason the camera doesn't let you adjust high enough there to hit that without aiming, which is cool. But I believe in that room, there's a trap in that one. So watch that. But in here is Petrified Dragonbone and Twinkling Titanite, and I think you either get 5 of each or 3 of each. 5 of one, 3 of the other. And here are the mages. So this is a black mage, or a dark magic mage. It's probably more her style. There's a handful of these in the DLC. They're all quite close together. The only real risk they pose is if they hit you with their magic. You know, if you don't know they're there and they summon something like Affinity, which they can do, if they hit you with that, it does wicked damage. Everything else can be dodged quite easily. And of course, this is a trap. If you fall in on the other side of the room, the people we killed up here will fall into the room as well. And the only exit from this is to step on that button, and you have to wait for the button to rotate 3 times before you can leave. So, essentially, it's a trap that you can't get out of. You have to fight, you have to be prepared. I don't think it's the greatest level design, but then again, I think the rest of this area now, I'm not too sure what this place is called. I think it's the Dragon Shrine. I think this place, on the surface, looks a hell of a lot more interesting than it is. And compared to what they did with Shulva, I think this is just linear and completely less interesting. And if you've seen the thumbnail for my playthrough, you'll notice this, because this is the corridor where those promotional images was used from. And I find it really funny that it doesn't get used at all. It's just this big, long corridor of nothing. There's a couple of offshoots that lead to different areas, but for the most, you do nothing in that area. So, that was a bad idea. But it did stun the enemy, which is nice to see. But do not sleep on these bugs. They cross distance amazingly. Like, you saw it just then. They do this crazy flying attack that reminds me of Jigglypuff from Smash Bros. Melee. And if anybody hasn't played that game, what you could do with Jigglypuff is you could cancel her jumps. She had like 7 jumps because she was a super floaty character. And what you could do is you could jump, you could do the Jiggly Punch, which is just a punch by a Jigglypuff, and then you could jump again. And the Jiggly Punch had a lot of momentum to it, so it would act as a jump. And you could jump, punch, and cover insane distances. And my friends used to hate me when I played as her. Because I was a very trollish Super Smash Bros. Melee player. This is very dangerous, this, by the way. What I just showed you then is if you shoot that switch, it will open the door across from me and you can jump over here to the bonfire. But I fucked the jump up because the jump on this game is... I think it's terrible. I will, to this day, say I do not like Dark Souls 2 jump. And I know a lot of people think it has the exact same height as Dark Souls 1. But the roll in Dark Souls 1 has more height than the jump in this game. And if you don't believe me, you just need to go back and play. You know, Dark Souls 1 feels in your memory just like this game, you know, in what it did. But it isn't. It's so different. And you only really get that contrast when you go back to it. And I'm tempted to do another playthrough of Dark Souls in a post-Dark Souls 2 world, because it just feels like such a different game. And I know there's a lot of people that are nostalgic and hungry for the Souls game that they love. And for a lot of people, that isn't Dark Souls 2. And for others, it is. It's just that divide. But thank you very much for watching, guys. There's only going to be, I think, 4 videos in this, maybe less. It's pretty quick when you know what you're doing. And then there's going to be a bonus video at the end where I do a couple of things that I didn't do in the main run of the DLC. But thank you very much for watching, and you take care now.